Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, a year ago this week, Congressman Steve Scalise suffered a near-fatal shooting incident. Now, a year later, he is considered to be a contender as the next Speaker of the U.S. House. In Baton Rouge, the Speaker of the Louisiana House has had a difficult year and may face more problems as another special session convenes. We'll look at these stories as well as a multi-part series on the children of Central City. Our Future Watch segment examines some long-stalled restoration projects, and we will inquire into the history of past governors who have faced numerous special sessions. And speaking of history, with the King and Queen of Spain in town, we'll look at what they should know about New Orleans. In the house for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Tyler Bridges, the New Orleans advocate, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and Richard Webster, reporter NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune. We're going to go over to Errol first and talk about Steve Scalise. I mean, a year ago, he was near death.
The future today looks a lot brighter for him than it did a year ago when the main question was survival. And now the question is more political achievement. And there's two possibilities in the immediate future. Both kind of hastened by Paul Ryan, who's the incumbent Speaker of the House, surprise announcement that he wasn't going to run for re-election. And so that position will be open in November after the elections. Scalise is the number two man in line as the whip, and so he could be a contender. The other is Kevin McCarthy, who's the House Majority Leader. So it's going to pretty much come down to the two of them. You think McCarthy has the upper hand because he's one rank higher, and he probably does. Scalise has a little bit stronger base among conservatives, but even if McCarthy gets elected as Speaker, that probably means that Scalise will become the majority leader. And so in any case, his power and his status in Washington grows. And plus, he's a national figure now because of what happened, that people are aware of him. And I think his presence was good, and I think he handled the whole situation well. So that's going to come up. The other possibility, of course, is that the Democrats could win the House in the fall elections, even though it seems unlikely. The Republicans have a majority, 241 to 194. And even Republicans who don't like Trump are unlikely to vote Democrat in this. And so I don't think that those things swing over. And so it's going to probably remain as a majority. If that happens, though, if for some reason, if Scalise is eliminated from the running, then that opens the possibility, people talk about the possibility of running for governor, because that's going to be coming around soon. And so the politics of the governor's race is out there. So there's these things floating around now between being Speaker of the House, House Majority Leader, or maybe a candidate for governor down the road.
If I could jump in, he
Sure.
actually told Political Magazine that he has ruled out running for governor. But I totally agree. What a great heartwarming story about, you know, I guess his official title is Steve Scalise, but when you talk to him, you just want to call him Steve. He's such a friendly, nice guy.
He always has been, too. It's the power didn't get to his head.
And that sort of contributed to his success, his political success, because he can open doors. You know, he can communicate with others.
But he also said at one point that he wouldn't run against Kevin McCarthy, too. But then since then he said, well, maybe under the right circumstances he will. It seems like political people who've eliminated themselves from running for office are able to find certain circumstances sometimes down the road. And so, but I think his future clearly lies in Washington. I mean, he's a very powerful person in Washington, and so better to be a powerful person in Washington than to be governor of Louisiana, unless you just miss being in Baton Rouge. So,
yeah, who would miss being in Baton Rouge?
Well, you've been there a lot lately,
I
and
have
you're going
been.
back. We'll talk about that in a second. But also, I mean, this has been a year certainly of recovery for Steve Scalise, for Congressman Scalise. I mean, in tough recovery because he was badly injured. And then last night we saw him on the baseball field, and he really made a great play right at the start.
And as I recall, the day of the shooting, we didn't know how bad it was. We knew he was injured. I remember the early report said he was shot in the hip, and so that seemed like something that would be survivable. It was only in the next few days, as the doctors began to operate and saw how the bullet had penetrated, that it became obvious that he was near death on this.
And there was some question at that point whether he would walk again.
Right.
If he did survive, would he be able to walk? And
then we end up
back
seeing
on the
him,
diamond.
Yeah, we see him on
Right.
the diamond, and the first batter hits the ball right to him, and he cleans the ball cleanly and throws the guy out. I mean, it's just a remarkable story.
And he stayed for one more play, and then he was off. But he's got standing ovation for it, just as he did when he re-entered the House on his first visit back to the House. So his has been, needless to say, a tremendous comeback story.
It would be more of an American symbol than your recovery going out to a baseball diamond,
Right.
and making the play at second base. So,
okay, we'll see what the future holds in store in terms of where politically our congressman will be going. All right, and we're talking about politics. It's still fully at play at in Baton Rouge at the state legislature, and so I've lost count. Another special session is beginning on Monday. And you're going to be there to tell us all about it.
It will be the 7th.
Is that record-breaking for us, for Louisiana?
No.
Oh. So we've had more.
It's a dubious
before.
achievement that was last equaled under Buddy Roemer, actually. Under Buddy Roemer, who was governor from 1988 to 92, there were 7 special sessions as well. In fact, there are 2 members of the legislature today who were in that 7th special session back in 1991 under Buddy Roemer. And that's Francis Thompson from Northeast Louisiana and John Alario, of course. And that 7th special session under Buddy Roemer, I just did the research in a story I've written for The Advocate, was called because of redistricting. Now, they had a bunch of special sessions under Buddy Roemer because of budget problems, the same problems that we've seen under Governor John Bel Edwards, and why he's calling now a 7th special session. But that 7th special session back in 1991 was to redistrict the state legislature. You know, every 10 years is something you have to do, redraw the boundaries because of population shifts. And the legislature back in 1991 had approved a new map, but the Justice Department had a say-so in whether it would be approved or not, and the Justice Department said that the legislature had to go back to the drawing board, literally, and redraw and create more African-American districts. And so that was the purpose of that legislative session back in 1991.
For that 7th one, the other ones, were there money issues also involved in those special sessions, such as what we're tackling these days?
Yeah, actually the fiscal situation there was actually worse. Our older viewers will remember the oil bust. I didn't mean to be looking at you when I said that. So there was the oil bust under Governor Edwards, and it really messed up the state's finances. A lot of people lost their jobs. And when Buddy Roemer took office at the beginning of 1988, the state was $1 billion in debt, or facing deficit. And the state couldn't even pay its bills. And so under Roemer, the legislature borrowed $1 billion and put the state on the road to filling that budget gap at that time.
But they took action to do it, right?
Yeah.
Within those special sessions.
Yes. Yeah,
so.
Those were the earlier special sessions that again led to ultimately, and then the 7th special session under Roemer.
So here we go, going on again, another special session, history revisiting itself. And again, budget issues. I mean, serious budget issues. At first, we were saying, what, over $1 billion, but then some money was found, so now we're looking at a $648 million only budget gap. What's going to be happening in this special session? Now, the governor is calling just to raise the revenue, but some other legislators have something else in mind.
Right. For just as a recap, in the regular session that just ended, they didn't quite solve the budget problems. They didn't quite raise enough money, and also in the special session they just had. So this will be a 7th special session. As you said, the governor tried to call it in a very narrow fashion, just to focus on raising enough money through sales taxes. They're short $500 million, at least of what the governor wants to spend in the state Senate as well. And then it looked like that the governor's call was very narrowly drawn and was going to sideline the very conservative chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, Cameron Henry from Metairie. But now Representative Henry is saying he's interpreting the call to allow him to reopen the budget. The budget was already approved by the legislature, but now he is going to try to reopen that, and that's going to cause a lot of fights if indeed he goes forward with that, instead of just to focus on raising revenue.
And you only have a few days for this. Is a short session.
Yeah,
so
9 days, and again, this thing that everyone's heard about, the fiscal cliff, it hits on June 30th. That's the end of the fiscal year, and they have to solve this all by June 30th.
But in 9 days, there's not much time for an extra fight. other than the fight you already have.
There isn't, but what we've seen in all the 6 earlier special sessions is a fight between the governor and the Republican-controlled state Senate on one side versus the House, which is more conservative, led by the Speaker Taylor Barra, and Cameron Henry has been a leader of those, saying that the legislature needs to reduce spending and reduce taxes, and we're going to see that play out again in this next special session.
So, as you noted, we do have a budget. It came out of this past session with the special session that was tagged to the regular session, right?
Yeah.
So we do have. So why does he want to visit the budget again?
Well, there
You
are
don't really have the
various
answer for that.
interpretations of that. Those who are, let's say, moderate Republicans and Democrats and the governor would say he's just trying to cause mischief for John Bel Edwards. Cameron would say he's trying to take a principled stand to make sure that the state's spending priorities are correct. So again, it is confusing. The legislature did approve a budget. It's $500 million short of what the governor and the state Senate want to spend. It's about $400 million short of what most of the House also wants to spend. So they're really fighting over what maybe about $100 million, but they've gone into a special session last year over, because they couldn't agree on a difference of $50 million. So there's going to be lots of fights, and typically what happens in these special sessions is it goes right down to the end, sort of like teenagers with their homework.
So there are going to be, well, the budget as it is right now, however it's going to be funded, we're looking at cuts in some areas. Is that going to be the case?
Yeah, and the budget they've approved already does include some cuts. That's the point that the governor likes to make. The question is, as in the special session just completed, is will they renew the half cent of the 1 cent sales tax that was approved in 2016? That expires on June 30th. Do you renew half of it? That's what the governor, the state Senate, and most of the House favors. But they could not get quite enough votes in that last special session to prove that, because you need 70 votes in the House. They only got 63. A smaller group of senators, House members, favors the 1/3 cent renewal. And so there will be a fight then again over, do you go the full half cent of the renewal of that 1 cent that's expiring, again, which is what the Senate, the governor and the Senate and much of the House favors, or do you go with 1/3?
Let's talk about Speaker Barra for a second. You know, it's not been the easiest of years for him.
Yeah, it is not. He was trying to pass 2 major bills in the regular session earlier this year. One was sought by Uber and Lyft, passed the House, and then was killed in the Senate. The other major bill he tried to get through was the one we talked a lot about before, with the Harris bill, which was going to renew their license for another 30 years. In exchange, Harris said they were going to invest $350 million, create a lot of jobs, and hire a bunch of people. That also sailed through the House, and then it ended up dying because of changes that the Senate made, saying it wasn't a fair deal. So Speaker Barra's 2 major pieces of legislation were killed in the regular session. Then in the special session that followed, those final 2 tax votes, again, one was to renew the half cent sales tax, the other was 1/3. He was badly on the losing side of both of those votes. And then on top of that, the governor just vetoed 8 of his infrastructure projects in his district. So a lot of things haven't gone well for him. He would say that he's held the line on spending, held the line on taxes, saved taxpayers a lot of money. But I think a lot of people would say things haven't gone well for him this year.
How does that impact the future of his speakership? You know, how does he continue to hold on to it?
Well, there's been a lot of rumblings that there might be a coup. That's very rare to try to do something like that. There have been no coup in the legislature since 1990 in the state Senate.
If you recall, he just barely got that speakership to begin with. It was like a last-minute manipulation.
Yeah, he was a compromise choice. He was not a guy that people had really expected to become a speaker. And many people would say that he has not been the strongest of leaders because of Cameron Henry has been a very strong anti-tax, anti-government member in the House, and also Lance Harris, who's the head of the Republican caucus. And but with only 1 year left, I think Speaker Barra's term is secure, and he does have very strong support among particularly the Acadiana delegation, and that's where he's from.
Okay, Tyler, well, you'll be back there next week. We'll see what happens.
Yes.
Thanks a lot. Over to Richard right now. You guys over at NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune, started running a series taking a look at the children of Central City and how the violence in that part of town is impacting the kids. What are you finding?
So we got a grant from USC Annenberg Center of Health Journalism to look at how exposure to violence impacts the health of children in Central City. With that grant, we rented office space at Apex Youth Center in Central City. And for the next 4 months, myself, Jonathan Bullington, who's the other reporter on the project, Brett Duke, who's the photographer, Emma Scott, the videographer, we followed this youth football team of 9 and 10-year-olds, the A.L. Davis Park Panthers. And what we found is that of this roughly 25 kids on this team, they'd all experienced, or the majority had experienced, some sort of form of trauma. It could be from one end, which is actually waking up and seeing their mother dead in the kitchen, to seeing someone murdered, to just sort of everyday poverty. There was a survey in Central City. Out of 300 kids, 1 in 5 had actually seen someone murdered. Half know of someone who've been murdered. So then the question is, what does this do to a child? Science has shown that when someone is exposed to danger, violence, cortisol, adrenaline levels rise in the body. This is to ensure survival. For most people, those levels drop down. For these children who have been exposed to trauma, violence, it typically doesn't, or they have problems regulating it. So this can cause severe anxiety, depression, anger management problems, ADHD, PTSD. And then what does this do to the child's life? I mean, it causes havoc in their lives. From school, they have behavioral problems, they can be expelled, suspended. Down the road, they can get involved with law enforcement.
So many questions about all of this. I mean, it's just hard to believe that this is in a part of town, in the city where we live, that these kids are experiencing this type of exposure, if not, directly being victimized by this. How are schools dealing with this?
So there's a small group of schools that are sort of involved in this trauma-informed collaborative. In total, there's about 11 schools. One group is dealing with a grant from the National Institute of Justice. The others are working with the City Health Department in Tulane, sort of teaching teachers basically how to look for trauma in their students. Whereas before it was sort of this zero, tolerance policy. If you have behavioral problems, you're getting kicked out. They're looking at, well, what does that do for the kid, basically? And especially if the problems the kids are showing in school are not really their fault. They're not bad kids. They've just seen awful, awful things during sort of the most important stage of development for these kids. And this is why we wanted to look at this, is because you read all these stories on the news about crime and young kids doing this. How did it happen? Well, this is one of the reasons,
Yeah, we had some stories recently we discussed, I think just last week, about the uptick in juvenile crime with just suddenly the spate of robberies and
11-year-olds
carjackings
involved in armed robberies.
By young kids. So, what actually are you all discovering? I mean, what's being done, certainly at the city level, and to try to, it comes down to safer streets for all the families living in Central City. What's being done to help the families?
So there are things that we know work for these kids. Cognitive behavioral therapy, like trauma-informed therapy, these things work. There's just few resources available in the community. Last year, the legislature and the governor cut $50 million in mental health funds, and a lot of that were programs that went to help these kids.
And if I could jump in just to tie what's going to be happening in the legislature in this next special session, again, that money will be at stake for mental health along with other stuff.
And so what they show is that, it costs $53,000 to jail a juvenile right now for a year. That's just 1 year. And they show the lifetime of not providing support services for these kids is a loss of $210,000 for one child. There's this Heckman equation that shows for every dollar you invest in sort of mental health for children and support services, you get a $13 return on investment. That's sort of the cold, brutal way to look at it. But you can also look at DJ Jubilee, who coached the Panthers for about 20 years in a 14-year span, lost 28 players to gun violence.
In a 14-year span?
In a 14-year span, 28 players. So we're focusing on this team of 9 and 10-year-olds right now. And as Jubilee says in the story, it's like, we know what's going to happen. Why don't we do something to help these kids now?
Is there a program more like, almost like a Teach for America, but Counsel for America, that could bring in able-bodied people to help these children?
I mean, that's a great suggestion. I have not heard anything like that, but like Children's Bureau, which provides the bulk, and they provide the bulk of these services, they cannot find anybody that they can hire because they can't pay enough.
Well, I see that I saw these pieces online, and that you have an area there where you can click on it and find out how you can actually participate, how members of the community can get involved and see what they could do to help.
Yes.
How long will this series go on?
So it started Wednesday, and then it ends Sunday, and it's running both in print and on online.
Right. Okay. Great coverage.
Thank you.
Good work. Thanks a lot, Richard. Over to Dawn. We have some stalled restoration projects of places that we'd really like to see back in commerce.
We have a lot. Errol just threw out some suggestions to talk about. I'm going to go for 4 of them.
Okay.
They are the former Cobb's Restaurant, the Lindy Boggs Medical Center, the Plaza Tower, and the Market Street Power Plant. In all cases, there's not a whole lot to say because they are stalled. For Cobb's especially, I talked to the people involved with the redevelopment of that. They tell me things are happening. They won't tell me what things, when we will see changes, but changes to Cobb's and some restoration of that former restaurant downtown are on the horizon.
And this has been closed for a long time.
It's been closed for a long, long time. We talked about it on this program a long time ago. It was supposed to be something called the Jockey Club. That never went anywhere. I don't know what happened to that project and why it went nowhere, but there is something apparently on the horizon. I asked if there was a timeline within the next 6 months. Would we maybe know? I got a no answer on that.
And for those who don't know, this was on St. Charles Avenue, the same block where Meyer the Hatter is,
Right.
across the street.
St. Charles and
It was
Canal.
a distinguished old building, yeah.
Old German restaurant.
Yeah.
The other 3 projects, Lindy Boggs Medical Center, Plaza Tower, and the Market Street Power Plant, are all owned and controlled now by MCC Real Estate or Joe Yeager, the developer. I was told this week that all 3 were bought under the auspices that federal tax credits would help make redevelopment of those buildings a possible thing. Last year there were tax law changes both at the federal level and the state level that made it harder for developers to put their numbers together, so that when a developer acquires a project like that, everybody needs to be paid out along the line. The realtors that work on it, the construction people, the designers. So if you're making less and less money, it's harder and harder to make that project work. I was told that across the nation, projects like this are stalled because of the tax law changes, and that there are some discussions, at least at the federal level, to maybe make some tweaks to the law so that projects can go again. In the case of the Lindy Boggs Medical Center, that project just finished remediating all the asbestos and removal of the contents. It was a medical center before Katrina. Stuff was still in
there,
the
and it's
building.
just finished removing
and
the
they have
contents?
now, I can't imagine the way the stuff smelled, looked, was. It is now, that has been remediated. The plan for that, possible plan for that, is to become an elderly care center. There was a report that came out recently that the baby boomers, as they age, want to be in urban settings. They don't want to be out in suburbia somewhere. They want to be in walkable neighborhoods where there are parks. Lindy Boggs is right there by the Lafitte Greenway, by grocery stores, by the bayou, so it could be a good fit there. The Plaza Tower was acquired a couple of years ago. It has been nothing since 2002 when it had to be remediated for asbestos and other things. It's all been remediated. Possible development there would be hospitality or residential, so condos, apartments, or hotel probably. The Market Street Power Plant, that's the power plant that sits upriver from the convention center, between the convention center and the 47-acre. It bookends the 47-acre property that the convention center is supposed to be redoing. That won't become something new until the convention center does its expansion, so that the whole area could fit. But it will be likely an entertainment district of some sort. And all 3 of those projects should have new life happening or maybe finished in the next 5 years.
Okay, so maybe some movement, a little bit of movement, not so much movement.
Yeah,
Okay, we'll keep
it's
our eyes on that.
coming. It is coming.
All right, Don, thanks a lot. Over to Errol right now, and we were visited by King and Queen.
Yeah, it occurred to me. I mean, it's very rare to have a reigning king or queen in New Orleans. And in fact, we're trying to do some. And being the ones in town tonight, I figured maybe we should talk about them in case we revert to Spanish rule or something. Okay, but King Felipe VI is in town with his wife Queen Letizia. By the way, who was a former news anchor in Spain. And they're here because of the tricentennial. And actually, San Antonio is celebrating its tricentennial this year, too. And so from here, they're going to San Antonio. What happened 300 years ago in San Antonio to mark the beginning? That was the building of the Alamo. And so they'll be going there. But as far as I can figure out, this is the 3rd time that reigning European royalty has come to New Orleans. The first time, most famous, was the Grand Duke Alexis in 1872, which happened to be Mardi Gras that year. And he did see a parade. He did see the Mardi Gras parade. Thanks to Nell Nolan in The Advocate, she found out that in 1953, when Greece still had a king, his name was King Paul, and King Paul came into town. with his wife, Queen Federica. And so they were here in 1953. They stayed at the Roosevelt Hotel. Then they went to Gallia Hall, and there was a parade to Gallia Hall. There was no parade for King Felipe, so this is the first time that we'll have a paradeless royal visit. But you know, you look at the rule at the reign of Spain in New Orleans, and it was really fairly important that the Spanish rule was from 1788 to 1802. I'm sorry, 1762 to 1803. And during that period, they established, they built roads. But one of the important things that happened was that in 1788 was the fire that destroyed most of what was then New Orleans. And New Orleans was what was the French Quarter. Something like 700 buildings got destroyed. And so most of what exists in the French Quarter today, that we see the old buildings, were buildings that were built by the Spanish. Right. And so it was Spanish architecture. Also, the king at the time was King Charles III, after whom St. Charles Avenue is named, after his patron. And so there was an important Hispanic influence. So.
Absolutely, yeah. Spain is a very important part of our history.
I said Hispanic, actually Spanish, which is different from
right.
from
and
Hispanic.
Also
Right.
the design of the quarter itself with the central plaza, as anybody who's been to Latin America would recognize that design with the city hall and the cathedral right there.
Right, the Presbytery and the Cabildo under Spanish rule, built under Spanish rule. Well, welcome to our city. It's good to have you back over here to come visit us.
And tonight they're at the Cabildo, which was built by the Spanish.
Okay, well, we've welcomed them, and so we're covered if we revert back to Spanish rule. Okay, looking to you.
Okay, up ahead, next week, the police and the SPCA are going to combine for a pet giveaway. You can adopt pets. It's going to be at the Mardi Gras Whirl. But what the police are going to give is, the seat restrainers for kids. Well, they got seat restrainer for pets now.
Okay,
and so when you buy a pet, the police will give you a pet seat restrainer next Saturday.
Good. Tyler.
So a big controversy during the last special session was that John Bel Edwards chose to not address the legislature as normally a governor does. He did it at the University of Louisiana Lafayette. So let's see. We don't know yet where he's going to be on Monday when he opens up the special session.
Okie doke. Don.
A lot of soccer talk this week with World Cup coming to the United States, but the Jesters, New Orleans' own Jesters, are currently in second place in their division. They take on their rivals, Chattanooga FC, in first place tomorrow night at 7 at Pan Am Stadium. It's cheap family fun.
Okay, doke. Thanks, Richard.
This can be a little self-serving, but on Monday we're going to have a 20-minute documentary by Emma Scott that's going to sort of wrap up the Children of the Central City, something we haven't really done before. A lot of work has gone into it, so I just suggest that everyone goes and checks that out.
NOLA.com?
NOLA.com/children.
Okie doke. Thanks a lot, you guys, for being here, and thank you all for joining us. And of course, we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.